Every summer, someone goes missing at Lake Lanier. A weekend trip turns into a search mission. A swimmer disappears, a body never resurfaces, and the same question echoes again. Why does this keep happening? More than 700 people have died here, yet no one can agree on what's really to blame. The water, the design, or the dark history buried underneath it. Long before Lake Lanier shimmered across North Georgia, there was a different world here, one made of red clay, pine trees and farmland. Dirt roads wound through small wooden homes and fields of corn and cotton. And in the early 1900s, it was alive with the sound of hammers building barns, the laughter of children walking to school, and church bells echoing across the hills. At the heart of this land stood a place called Oscarville, a small but thriving community built by black families who had survived slavery and were determined to make a life of their own. They worked the soil, traded goods, and sent their children to school. These weren't wealthy people, but they were proud, independent, and building something sacred, a home that belonged to them. Oscarville had its own schools, churches, and farms. Families helped each other with harvests, repaired each other's roofs, and gathered every Sunday to worship. In a time when much of the South still clung to hate, Oscarville was proof that progress was possible. But in 1912, everything changed. That fall, in nearby Forsyth County, the body of an 18-year-old white girl named May Crow was found in the woods. She had been beaten and left for dead. The discovery sent shockwaves through the area, and within hours rumours spread like wildfire. Local newspapers rushed to print stories without proof. Gossip turned into accusation, and accusation turned into vengeance. The blame quickly fell on three young black men, Ernest Knox, Oscar Daniel, and Rob Edwards. None of them had solid evidence against them, but that didn't matter. In the South of 1912, accusation was often enough to sign a death warrant. Rob Edwards was the first to be taken. He was dragged from his jail cell in Cumming by a white mob. They beat him, shot him, and hanged him from a telephone pole downtown. His body was left there, a public warning to every black family in the area. Days later, Knox and Daniel were put on trial. But trial is too generous a word. It was a spectacle. White crowds filled the courthouse, shouting for blood. When the guilty verdict came, as everyone knew it would, cheers erupted. Both young men were sentenced to hang, and on the day of their execution, thousands came to watch. They brought picnic baskets. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and something far worse, hatred pretending to be justice. After that, the violence didn't stop. It spread. Groups of white men calling themselves night riders began roaming the countryside, targeting every black family in Forsyth County. They rode on horseback or in wagons, masked and armed. They shot into homes at night, threw dynamite through windows, and set houses on fire. If someone didn't leave fast enough, they were beaten or worse. These night riders were organised, deliberate, and they had a message. Forsyth County is white now. By the end of that terror campaign, more than 1,100 black residents, nearly all of Forsyth's black population, had fled. Families who'd lived there for generations were forced to abandon everything. The land they left behind, acres of fertile farmland, homesteads, stores and schools, was simply taken. Their homes were burned or occupied by white neighbours who claimed the land as their own. And Forsyth County became known across Georgia as a white county. For decades, black families didn't return. Even in the 1980s, signs of that old hatred lingered. But the story of Oscarville didn't end with exile. It ended with water. By the time the 1950s rolled around, America was in a new chapter. The war was over. Soldiers had come home, factories were roaring, and the country was growing faster than ever. The South, especially Georgia, was trying to catch up. Modern roads, big cities, and new energy. The government had plans to reshape the landscape itself, and one of the boldest of those plans came from the US Army Corps of Engineers, a massive project called Buford Dam. On paper, it looked like progress. Officials promised flood control, hydroelectric power, and a new water source for the expanding city of Atlanta. It was sold as a win for everyone, the kind of clean, modern infrastructure that would bring jobs and stability to the region. But buried in those blueprints was something else. The construction of Lake Lanier, the artificial lake behind Buford Dam, would cover everything in its path. And what stood in that path were entire communities, including what was left of Oscarville. The announcement brought excitement to some and dread to others. Surveyors arrived in trucks, maps in hand, marking properties and measuring boundaries. Families who had lived on that land for generations suddenly found government men standing on their porches with clipboards, asking how much they thought their homes were worth. But it wasn't really a question. The government didn't need permission. It had eminent domain, a law that allowed them to take private land for public use. Compensation was offered, but it was never fair. Some families took the money because they had no choice. Others resisted until sheriffs arrived to push them off their land. What was once rolling farmland and quiet backroads slowly became a construction site. Bulldozers tore through pastures. Entire forests were levelled. Cemeteries were marked for relocation. In total, the Corps of Engineers acquired over 56,000 acres, roughly the size of a small city, and began clearing it to make way for the water that would soon rise. They tried to move what they could. Crews dug up graveyards, transferring remains to new cemeteries. But records were incomplete, headstones were broken, and not every grave was found. Locals who lived through it say some burial sites were simply left behind, especially those that were old or unmarked. To this day, divers and sonar scans have uncovered stone markers and coffin-shaped depressions deep below the surface. When the Corps said they were clearing the land, it didn't mean they cleared it completely. They cut down trees, but only to the waterline. Everything below that stayed. Tree trunks stripped of their branches still rise from the lake bed like blackened fingers reaching upward. Roads were left too. Asphalt paths that once led to farmhouses now vanish into dark, cold water. On sonar, you can still trace them. Faint lines cutting across the bottom of the lake. Ghost highways that lead to nowhere. Old foundations, bridges and church steps remain frozen in time below, preserved in silt and darkness. The work took years. Buford Dam was completed in 1956, standing over 200 feet tall and stretching nearly half a mile across the Chattahoochee River. Once the gates closed, the water began to rise. It didn't happen overnight. For months, the valleys slowly filled, creeping over fence posts, swallowing barns, and pushing higher until entire towns disappeared. Archival footage from the time shows men in hard hats watching as the water inched higher. Families stood on the banks, staring at what used to be their homes. The lake reached full capacity in 1957. The old landscape hills, bridges, fields and graves vanished under hundreds of feet of water. What replaced it was something entirely new, a sparkling blue reservoir stretching across 38,000 acres, bordered by newly built marinas, campgrounds and beaches. Under the surface, the past refused to die. Divers who've gone down into the lake describe it as eerie, cold, dark and disorienting. Visibility drops to almost nothing. Some say they've come across old roads, perfectly preserved in the silence. Others claim to have found the remains of houses, cars, and even tools scattered across the mud. The deeper they go, the older it feels, like descending through layers of forgotten history. Newsreels from the 1950s show men celebrating the project's success, calling it a symbol of progress. But progress always comes with a cost, and here, the cost was more than land. It was a memory. The people who'd been forced out decades earlier, their children and grandchildren, never saw their community honoured or rebuilt. As the years passed, Lake Lanier stopped being a construction project and became a destination. Families picnicked on its shores, speedboats cut across its water, and tourists flocked there in the summer heat. But locals began whispering about something else, something they couldn't explain. The water didn't feel normal. It wasn't just the cold or the currents. It was the silence underneath. The waste sound seemed to travel strangely across the surface, and how fog sometimes rolled in without warning, thick enough to swallow boats whole. People started calling it haunted. Fishermen said they'd hear voices out on the water late at night, faint, desperate, calling from somewhere they couldn't see. Some claimed to hear screams carried by the wind, echoing across the coves. Others swore they felt hands brush against their legs while swimming, even in deep, open water. Divers too told stories. They'd go down to inspect old bridges or rescue lost gear, And when they resurfaced, they refused to talk about what they'd seen. That's how the legend began. The lake wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. And at the heart of that curse was one story that everyone in North Georgia knows, the story of the Lady of the Lake. Her name, at least in life, was Delia Parker Young. In the summer of 1958, Delia and her friend Susie Roberts borrowed Susie's car, a 1954 Ford, and set out for a night out in nearby Dawsonville. But sometime during that drive home, they vanished. For months, search teams scoured the area. Police dragged parts of the lake near Brown's Bridge, thinking the women might have gone off the road, but nothing surfaced. The families waited, clinging to hope that maybe the women had run away. But a year and a half later, hope turned into horror. 18 months after the disappearance, a fisherman spotted something floating near the bridge, a swollen, bloated body in a blue dress. The corpse was badly decomposed, unrecognizable and missing both hands and several toes. The community believed it was Delia Parker Young. The lake had finally given her back, but only part of her. Her missing hands became a key part of the story. Some said they were severed by catfish or machinery. Others whispered that they were taken for a reason, that Delia had tried to claw her way out of the water, scraping against rock and metal as she drowned. No one really knew. For decades after, rumours spread about a ghostly woman seen wandering near Brown's Bridge, the same spot where Delia and Susie had disappeared. Drivers reported seeing her late at night, a pale figure in a blue dress dripping wet, her hands gone, her eyes empty. Some said she tried to flag them down as if asking for help. Others claimed she simply stared before vanishing into thin air. Then, decades later, the lake offered another secret. In 1990, construction workers repairing the bridge found a rusted car deep below the surface, a 1954 Ford. Inside it were human remains, identified through records as Susie Roberts. After 32 years, the second woman had finally been found. It confirmed what everyone had suspected: the two friends had driven off the bridge that night, straight into the lake. But if Susie was still in the car, who was the woman in the blue dress found years earlier? Forensic testing was impossible at the time, and by the time Susie was found, the first body had long been buried. The mystery was never officially solved. The story of the Lady of the Lake only grew stronger. Lake Lanier may have been built for progress, but over the years, it's gained a far darker reputation as one of the deadliest lakes in America. Since the 1950s, more than 700 people have lost their lives here. Some drown, some vanish without a trace. And every year, that number grows. Locals call it cursed. Officials call it a coincidence. But divers, rescue workers, and families who've lost someone, they tell a different story. Beneath that calm, glassy surface lies chaos. The water hides jagged tree trunks, rusted machinery, sunken boats, and old concrete foundations from the towns that used to exist before the lake was filled. It's not smooth sand down there, it's a maze of the past, a place where even the most experienced divers risk getting trapped. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. The temperature drops suddenly, icy cold spots that hit your body like a shock. Visibility disappears within inches. Rescue teams say that once you go under, it's like swimming through black coffee. You can't see your hand, even if it's right in front of your face. That's what makes recovery efforts nearly impossible. When someone goes missing in Lake Lanier, search teams can spend weeks combing the water, using sonar, divers, and boats with high-powered lights. And yet, bodies often don't surface. Sometimes they get tangled in the branches of old trees still standing underwater. Other times they sink into the thick, muddy bottom and never rise again. Then there are the stories that stick with you, the ones that make this lake feel more like a warning than a weekend escape. In July 2012, 11-year-old Kyle Glover, the stepson of singer Usher, was on an inflatable raft with a friend near the lake's holiday marina. It was a bright, sunny day, the kind that draws thousands of families to the water. But within seconds, everything changed. A man on a jet ski lost control and slammed into the boys. Kyle was knocked unconscious. He never woke up. His death made national news, but for locals, it was one more tragedy in a long list that never seems to stop growing. And it's not just accidents like that. People drown in calm, open water with no warning at all. Some are strong swimmers familiar with the lake. Others are first-timers who never realise how deceptive the water can be. The currents under the surface are unpredictable. One second you're floating, the next, a powerful undertow pulls you down. The dam nearby creates strange, shifting water flows that can trap even experienced divers. Over the decades, the stories pile up. A man goes for a late-night swim and doesn't come back. A boat flips during a party, and rescuers recover only half the passengers. A mother clings to her child after their jet ski tips over. Rescuers find her alive, but her child's body days later. Every tragedy feels different, but they all end the same way, with questions that never get answered. Some say it's the lake itself, a man-made body of water built on uneven land, where valleys, trees, and entire towns were never fully cleared before being flooded. That means the bottom isn't flat. There are sudden drop-offs, hidden holes, sharp rocks, and the remains of bridges and fences that were left behind. Divers talk about brushing past cold metal, the skeletons of old cars, bits of rebar, pieces of houses. One wrong move, one tangle, and you might not come back up. There's another theory though, one that goes beyond physics or geography. Locals whispered that the spirits of Oscarville, the people driven from their homes before the dam was built, still linger under the surface, that the lake took lives because it was built on top of injustice. Some even claim that the number of deaths each year is the lake collecting what was never buried right. Now, whether you believe that or not, the numbers are chilling. Between 1994 and 2020 alone, over 700 people drowned in Lake Lanier. That's just the official count. Others are listed as missing, presumed dead, their remains never recovered. There's the case of a young couple whose boat capsized near Gainesville. The woman's body was found days later, but her fiancé was never recovered. There's the story of two brothers who went cliff jumping. One resurfaced, gasping for air, but the other never came back up. And then there are the countless unnamed swimmers and fishermen who vanish without making the news. And that's what keeps people talking, because maybe deep down, they know the truth. The water doesn't just take lives, it keeps stories. And Lake Lanier has more than enough of those to last a lifetime. For decades, people have argued whether Lake Lanier is cursed or just careless. But there's another side of the story, one grounded not in folklore, but in science. The truth is, this lake was never meant to be what it is today. It wasn't built for swimming, for speedboats, or for floating docks. It was built for power, to control floods, generate electricity, and feed water to Atlanta. Recreation came later, almost as an afterthought, and that decision turned a man-made reservoir into one of the most deceptively dangerous bodies of water in the country. When the US Army Corps of Engineers began construction in the 1950s, they weren't working with a clean slate. The land that would become Lake Lanier was uneven, carved by valleys, scattered with trees, covered in farmland, and dotted with old towns like Oscarville that were never fully cleared before the flooding. When the dam closed and the water began to rise, everything that was left behind stayed there. The result was a jagged landscape frozen underwater. That uneven foundation is one of the main reasons the lake is so unpredictable. In some spots, the water is only a few feet deep. Take one step forward, and suddenly it drops to 40. Those hidden ledges and sinkholes create sudden vertical shifts that catch swimmers off guard. People wading near the shore think they're in safe, shallow water until their feet find nothing beneath them. By the time panic sets in, the cold water and low visibility make it almost impossible to recover balance or direction. Then there's the way the lake's underwater structure moves. Because it was built over valleys and forested areas, there are natural funnels where water flows and swirls in strange ways. Engineers call them microcurrents, small whirlpools or suction points, created by changes in elevation underwater. When the dam releases water, or when boats disturb the surface, those currents shift, creating unpredictable pulls beneath the calm. They don't look threatening from above, but below, they can drag a person down just long enough to stop them from resurfacing. Even the biology of the lake works against swimmers. Decades of submerged trees, crops, and vegetation have decomposed slowly at the bottom. That rotting organic matter releases methane and carbon dioxide gas, forming pockets that rise and burst unpredictably. Scientists believe those gas pockets can alter water density and buoyancy in small areas, making it harder for a person or object to float. In simple terms, the water can suddenly stop holding you up. Then there's the visibility or lack of it. The soil around Forsyth County is rich in red clay, and every storm or boat wake stirs it up. Add in runoff from nearby construction and natural silt, and the water turns cloudy within minutes. Divers who've worked in Lake Lanier describe the conditions as blind diving. Even with powerful lights, they can't see more than a few inches ahead. That's one reason why recovery operations take so long. But the danger doesn't stop there. Beneath that murky water are forests that were only partially cleared. When the lake was filled, most trees were cut at the base, not uprooted. Their trunks and branches still stand like a sunken forest. Over time, algae and sediment coated them, turning them into underwater traps. When divers descend to search for missing people, those same branches can snag their gear, or ropes. Some divers refuse to go below 30 feet for that reason alone. And because the lake floor is littered with debris, old cars, boat wrecks, even machinery left behind from before the flooding, sonar technology struggles to read it clearly. The echoes bounce off metal and concrete, confusing the signals and making it hard to identify bodies or wreckage. Recovery teams sometimes spend days scanning an area before sending divers down. By then, shifting silt layers may have buried what they were looking for. Silt is another silent hazard. It collects in soft layers across the lake bed, especially in coves where water movement is slow. It's so fine that when disturbed, it explodes into a cloud that blocks all vision and acts almost like quicksand. Once you sink into it, even slightly, it's hard to move. Several divers have reported finding footprints in the silt that just end mid-step, as if the person vanished. And then there's the cold. The deeper parts of Lake Lanier sit hundreds of feet down, and the temperature there can drop fast. Even on a hot Georgia day, that deep water stays icy. When swimmers fall suddenly into one of those cold layers, their bodies react instantly. Muscles tighten, lungs seize, and reflexes fail. It's called cold shock. Within seconds, even a strong swimmer can't control their breathing or movement. Add panic and poor visibility, and it becomes a deadly combination. Local officials have tried to explain these dangers for years. They point to the lake's design, how it wasn't built for crowds or motorboats. They remind people that there are more than 11 million visitors each year, many of them unfamiliar with the lake's layout. That's an enormous amount of traffic for a reservoir that was never meant to handle it. Add alcohol, high speeds, and holiday crowds, and accidents become almost inevitable. Boating under the influence is one of the biggest factors behind the lake's rising death toll. Studies show that even small amounts of alcohol increase disorientation and slow reaction times, especially in the heat. Then there are the hidden dangers just below the surface: sharp metal, tangled wires, and old bridge remains. Shallow coves may look harmless, but they're often filled with the remains of what used to be towns and farms. A single slip or dive in the wrong spot can mean a serious injury before you even realise what's happened. That's what makes Lake Lanier so unique and so dangerous. It's not one single thing that causes the drownings or the disappearances. It's everything at once: a design built for industry, repurposed for leisure. A landscape reshaped by man but never truly tamed. Ask anyone who grew up around Lake Lanier, and you'll hear it. Whispered, half joking, but never fully dismissed, the lake is cursed. Too many deaths, too many disappearances, too much darkness tied to one place. For many, those tragedies aren't random, they're retribution. People here say the land remembers. It remembers what was done to it, and to those who lived on it long before the water came. You can drain a field, cut down its trees, even flood its valleys, but you can't wash away the blood that's soaked into it. And Lake Lanier was built on land that had already seen more suffering than most places ever will. Before there was a lake before Oscarville, this land belonged to the Cherokee and Creek nations. For generations they farmed, hunted, and lived across the hills of North Georgia. Then came the 1830s, the Trail of Tears. Thousands of native families were forced out, marched west at gunpoint, their homes seized and repurposed for white settlers. This same soil became the stage for one of the most brutal displacements in American history. A century later, those same hills became home to another group searching for peace, freed black families building lives in Oscarville after slavery. They worked the same land the Cherokees had once called home. And just like the tribes before them, they too were driven out by violence, terrorized by mobs that burned their homes and stole their farms. So when the government came decades later to flood that same region and create Lake Lanier, many locals felt the pattern repeating itself. Another erasure, another layer of loss buried underwater. That's where the curse begins. Not in the supernatural sense, at least. Not at first, but in the emotional one. Because how many times can a land be taken, emptied, and forgotten before it starts to feel like it's fighting back? To this day, people claim to feel something off about the lake, a heaviness in the air, a kind of energy that makes you uneasy. Fishermen who've been out on the water for decades say they've seen shadows below the surface that aren't fish. Divers talk about cold spots that seem to move on their own, like something brushing past. And when storms roll over the lake, lightning always seems to hit in the same place, right above what used to be Oscarville. If you trace the story of this land, the pattern becomes hauntingly clear. The Cherokees were driven off, the freed black families were lynched or exiled, then the government flooded what was left. Each act buried the memory of the last, layer by layer, until all that pain, all that loss ended up sealed beneath hundreds of feet of water. Maybe that's what people mean when they say the lake is cursed. Maybe it's not ghosts rising from the depths, but generations of sorrow demanding to be seen. Over the years, the idea of a curse has evolved from folklore into something deeper, a way for people to make sense of what keeps happening here. Every new drowning, every missing person, every tragedy feels like a wound that never closes. Even the Cherokee have legends about water spirits, entities tied to rivers, and lakes who protect the balance of nature. Some elders once warned that disturbing the land or the water would anger those spirits. That warning echoes eerily now, as Lanier continues to take lives year after year. Some pastors in nearby towns even talk about it in sermons. They say the lake represents what happens when you try to bury your sins instead of facing them. Even if you don't believe in spirits or ghosts, the guilt of what happened here still hangs in the air. It's in the way people hesitate before jumping in the water. It's in the quiet that settles over the lake at dusk, when the surface turns still and the shoreline darkens. So what's the truth beneath the water? It's not one answer, it's many. Science explains how people die. The history explains why this place carries such weight. And spirituality, whether you believe in it or not, explains how that weight keeps finding new ways to show itself.